for all different sectors and stuff. So it's not a problem, to be perfectly honest with you. Right, we all ready?
Yep.
Magic hands. And 5. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another E5 podcast. I'm your host, Paul Meenan, and today I have a plethora of guests. Let's introduce them. Introduce my tag team partner.
Hello, I'm JW.
We're also joined by
Tom Bickerton.
Welcome back, Tom. Now, we have some new co-hosts. The first one is long overdue. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Pashley.
Jonathan Pashley, E5 guy. You may remember him from such elect shows as Sandown and every other one, pretty much. So he's one of the lads. But lads, today we are joined by a brand new guest, a gentleman by the name of George Wandrum. Hello, sir, and welcome to the podcast.
How are you?
So what we're doing is, in this, we're going to talk about something that I'm not confident about. There we go. I haven't got a violin to make everyone feel sorry for me, but I am glad to say the limits of my competence are strained. But I am surrounded on this podcast by people who have experience and competence in the subject matter of COMPEX installations. George, what do you know about COMPEX installations? What is COMPEX?
Right, electrical work in a potentially explosive atmospheres, basically. We've got the BS7671 for your commercial, industrial, and domestic wiring, but not many people are aware that we've got a separate regulation, BS standard 60079, which is for petrol forecourts. It doesn't cover the shop, it just covers the forecourt, which many approved contractors at the moment, no fault of their own, are not aware that there's another regulation on the petrol forecourt. So I just want to come on with you guys, talk about that. These guys are doing perfect electrical work on petrol filling stations, but then when they come to do work on the origin, to the BS7671, they actually alter the requirements for the APIA Blue Book, which is my regulations on petrol forecourts. So they need to know, not about it, they need to know that there's a limitation of scope that they can only work to up to a petrol station. I'll give you an example. So if you've got a local petrol station and they ring you up and they want all the lights changing in the shop for LED, things like that, and in the canopy, that's fine. That's not covered under COMPEX, the canopy. It's above 1.4 meters high, so vapors heavier than air. So everything up there doesn't matter. So, but then as they're there, can you look at this? Can you look at and then the biggest worst thing is making a petrol station PME. We all know the best earthing in the BS7671. We're all striving for PME. On a petrol station, we don't want PME. Try and quickly explain why we don't want PME is for divergent neutral current in a pen conductor. Let's basically, you've got every single major installation down the road connected to the DNO supply. All those little faults from all those companies and everything. We don't want them all coming back into the forecourt because the neutral is connected to the earth and creating that current potential atmosphere on that petrol forecourt with those vapors. So if you create your own earth on a petrol station, you've got no way that you've got other fault currents coming into the petrol station into that hazardous area. So you can control it by keeping that petrol station TT, which everyone goes, oh, TT. You go backwards, not with the hazardous areas. It's the way it's got to be. But that's just the way approved contractors just don't understand that it needs to be TT, and that's what we just need to explain.
Sorry about that. I was just Googling the standard. Sorry, there's my lack of competence there. I now have the said standard in front of me, by the way. So not that I'm going to speed read it. It's 73 pages. Anyway, right. So a couple of questions there, because you've just hit home on PME, because a lot of people listening will be very used to TNCS or PME used on domestic, commercial, industrial supplies. We know the hazards, which in the last decade have become very prevalent from the loss of pen conductors, poor joints on a very substandardly maintained DNO network. Now, you're saying, rightly so, that there could be diverted neutral currents, which could cause potential atmospheres, i.e. potential for sparking, explosive, because obviously COMPEX is about hazardous atmospheres with regards to gases you can't see, high explosion risk, stuff like that. Funny enough, you say that, because I think I mentioned this in a podcast a while ago. The old electricity boards, and you can tell me if this is the case, in the old electricity board PME guides, they used to talk about loss of pens and diverted neutral currents. And on certain installations, they mandated a minimum bonding size, which was far more in excess of 7671. So first question, is that the case on COMPEX installations? Do you have to do bigger bonding systems?
Right. With the TT, with the BSM 671, we say an earth rod is unstable at 200 away. Petrol station is 20 ohms. So if you're 20 ohms, you are at your maximum limit. And what you've got to do then is you've got to put more linear rods in. So what you do, and this is I'm just going to talk about a couple of mistakes I come across when I'm in the industry doing periodic inspections. You put one rod down, you haven't reached the 20 ohms. It's 100 ohms each. So you've got to put another rod down, but they daisy chain that rod to another rod, and then daisy chain that rod to another rod. But if you lose that first connection or lose that connection on the first one, you've lost all the rods. So what you've got to do with the guidance, again, you have an earth bar, you put one rod out from the earth bar to one rod, from the earth bar to a separate rod, and you keep driving down rods till you reach and you compass that 20 ohms. I've got a clamp meter which clamps. None of the old earth rod testers used to put 3 spikes down. You should be reading for an earth rod. Because it's got all tarmac around the petrol forecourt, things like that, there's nowhere to put these spikes in. So I've got a big earth leakage tester by Mega. It's got quite a big round clamp on it. You clamp on them, and it gives you your ohms reading of each rod. You have the maximum of 100 ohms per rod, and then accumulation of them all go below 20 ohms. And then obviously you can decide on what setting you set your RCD to reach those touch voltages. Then on the forecourt, you can have up to 1 amp on an RCD. And obviously, because you're going TT, then you have to have an RCD covering the whole of the installation. But the better your earth rod, you can stiff that amperage up, and then you can use selectivity now throughout the installation. Then so you don't have to worry about the whole petrol station tripping out in one go. You know what I mean?
So what you're saying is basically everything is on petrol stations. Again, tell me if I'm wrong. So it's TT installations, earth electrodes, a maximum of 20 ohms. The configuration is separate, at least 2 separate runs from the main earth terminal to separate earth rods, as many as you need to get that 20 ohm reading, which is good, because that means you haven't got everything in series with one break. You've got redundancy in your earthing, and then depending on what reading you're getting, you are then able to dial in and selectively adjust your RCDs to ensure you have selectivity or discrimination across them. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, I can do
as a retrofit, if I go to a petrol station now and test its PME, we'll say just a PME, because you are allowed TNS on a petrol station, because there are no divergent neutral currents. So we say on PME, if I go to a petrol station on periodic inspection and it's got PME, I got one of them. That's the only trouble with that is when you're dealing with a petrol station, you cannot clamp. It's not big enough to clamp around some of the cores. That's an E50
DCM 300.
Yeah.
But I do have also, because I like my toys, I've got the 305E as well, and I've also just bought the Fluke one with the Flexi lead to go around. That is superb with a Bluetooth, so you can clamp on around 3 phases and just take the reader, put it onto your trunking, and just stand there and watch it. It's so much easier than crawling down trying to read a clamp meter.
The beauty of that 300E is if you clamp on a twin and earth, it'll calculate the current in the earth with still the earth inside. That, as I believe, when the Mega salesman sold us that piece of kit, you clip it around the twin and earth, and it will tell you the current in the earth. With it, because obviously when you use those clamp meters,
these are brilliant.
You're supposed to clamp the live on a single phase. You clamp the neutral in the earth, the phase in the neutral, and it'll give you obviously your imbalance then. But
Earth
then you
leakage
can clamp it
clamps
around
do that.
you can clamp it around the Earth as well on a twin and Earth, and so it's good for fault finding all your circuits, for nuisance tripping. That's going off the market now for petroleum.
No. It's all good. Listen, I love my toys, man. I'm trust me. Lots of people know, and John knows this. But I'm massively obsessed with earth leakage at the moment. It's a curse and a nuisance, because who would have thought earthing systems can cause problems on electrical installations? But and the trouble is as well, it'd be really interesting to understand. Maybe this is a question for later. We're not considering cumulative leakage from electrical installations enough, especially in domestic, where people are selecting RCDs, people are still putting in split load boards rather than RCBOs. There's now that regulation of 9 or 10 milliamps per circuit. How does COMPEX installations kind of divvy that up a bit?
The trouble is, if I don't know if you've had a look at if you've ever seen a periodic inspection for a petrol forecourt.
No, I haven't.
They've got parts of it wrong, because they've asked you to clamp the main earth under in service. But then you're going to get functional earth leakage, and they're asking that for DNC reading. But you have to have the main switch off with all the earthing connected to take you true DNC reading. You cannot take that DNC reading with the installation on, because you've got functional earth leakage you're picking up. So on the form, it's literally says on the form in front of me, clamp in service. Well, all you're proving then is how much earth leakage you've got. And it's not all coming down that one, I know. I mean, as we know, you can't get earth leakage clamping on the main earth anyway, because you got all your earthing going out to everywhere else, and then only a minor bit of it's coming down the main earth anyway. But it's like some testing, like done on a forecourt. You do your PFC testing, your ZE testing. You got a special socket on a special forecourt, which you switch the main switch off, and you have tails come inside that main switch, which has got all your protection into a special box, the 32-amp double pole breaker, and that's purely for testing purposes only. It's got no protection on it whatsoever. It's got 32-amp double pole MCB. What that's for is when you disconnect your earth, you do ZE, but you need to keep the earth disconnected to do your PFC, which contradicts the BS 7671 guidance note 3. They say to put your earth back onto the main bar. So you're taking an in-service PFC reading, because that's what it would be in an in-service situation. With a petrol station, you can't afford to do a PFC test with that earth connected, because if you're putting that kind of current down that cable, you're potentially putting those currents in that forecourt then. So but then I'm aware of this because I'm testing. But if an approved contractor goes on a petrol filling station and they do a whole shop refit and they do all the sockets and everything else, and they produce a certificate, they're going to do a ZE at the DB, and then they're going to connect that main earth and they're going to do a PFC reading.
Yep.
Which they shouldn't be. They need to have that main earth disconnected to do a PFC, and they wouldn't know any different. They're doing it to guidance note 3, so they're doing everything else they're supposed to be doing. But obviously, when it comes into your origin and your hazardous area on a petrol filling station, it's a no-no on the APIA Blue Book. So this is where it's nice to have a discussion. So some contracts are not aware that there's two regs for a forecourt and the shop are separate,
So it's probably worth at this time then, just in case you're watching and wondering who those other two handsome chaps at the bottom of the screen are, or maybe at the top, depending on how you're viewing this on YouTube. Tom and Jono, your experiences with COMPEX, have you just done petrol station? I mean, I did a couple of days at petrol stations. It's well documented. No idea what I was doing, and it was an awful experience. But let's go with Jono first. Jono, what's your experience with COMPEX in general?
It's an area that I'm getting pushed closer and closer towards by some of my clients at the moment. They've had enough of people who they keep having on site. They have guys on, things just, there's a mess left when the guys leave. And we've done all their, non-haz stuff for a long time now, and they want us to move into that area and take over it, to the point where they're now happy to pay for us to go on the training. The biggest things that we be dealing with is landfill gas, and the areas that we have that are, we've got wells to extract leachate from the cells because it can't be allowed to leak into the natural water system, but also in them wells you're going to end up with methane and hydrogen sulfide. The hydrogen sulfide is taken to an on-site generation facility where it's burnt, and we produce 6.6 kV out of that site.
So it's fair to say that you're developing and emerging into the wonderful world of COMPEX then.
Yes.
You have some unlimited experience. Mr. Bickerton, what's your experience, good sir, of the wonderful world of COMPEX?
Well, my background is still new. Like Jono was just saying, he's getting into it. I only finished and qualified about 4 years ago, so I've got a year left on my ticket before I have to renew it. My background is predominantly gas works and oil refinery plants. That's kind of where my background is in maintenance and install. I haven't done any testing in that sort of area yet, but I've been fascinated by sort of how different areas of people have been doing their installation on testing on petrol forecourts. I mean, I honestly, I thought it was just a COMPEX contractor who actually did everything, testing and install, but who knew?
I've got one. I tell you what has fascinated me with what George has just told us is old Muggins here. If I was brought onto a petrol station for a day and I brought my Mega, which is sat behind me, I'd be straight in onto that mains. Right, lads, let's do the ZE, PFC, PSCC, boom, small fireball potentially, and it's, again, this is an area. I mean, you'll hear a lot of electricians, and tell me if you think I'm wrong here. When electricians are defining the industry, they'll always say domestic, commercial, industrial, but there's always specialist. So I'm fortunate I worked in railways, which is very specialist, because if you screw up, you can derail trains and do all that sort of stuff. But there's the COMPEX, there's offshore, there's marine type install. There's lots of specialism, theatre lighting, temporary installations, fairgrounds events. There's lots of unique installations that have their own requirements. Now, you mentioned the Blue Book. Now, the Blue Book, for those listening, isn't 7671, because in these podcasts, there we go.
That's it.
Oh my God, look at the thickness. For those listening, please watch the YouTube. It's rather weightier than the regulations. So for those listening, we've always said that BS 7671 is the minimum standard. You work from it, not to it, and especially in complex environments, it would only give you a very fundamental principles guide, which you would have to adopt and then apply more external influences and other guidance. And let's get this right, the Association for Petroleum and Explosives Administration, who were founded in 1958, do lots and lots of research, and they publish that good book, sir, known, what did you call it, the Blue Book?
The Appia Blue Book, that's the 4th edition now.
So the Appia Blue Book 4th edition. Yeah, there you go. It's oh blimey, yeah, okay. it's not cheap. Well, it's probably about a little bit more expensive than the regs.
But if you, hey. Well then, me and my partner is a member of the AEPA, and you get obviously, if you're a member, you get it at a reasonable price.
75 quid if you're a member. Non-member, £150. I have to say, I'm very tempted to look at it now. I have a story to tell about this actually, because JW, do you have a Lucy meter on you?
I do not. Isn't that horrendous?
So, well, okay, for those listening, if anybody has a Lucy meter, please send it to JW. His address is on his website. So when I was an apprentice on London Underground years ago, they used to use Lucy meters. So in the good old days of London Underground, you would select and erect a cable management system. When it was completed, it would be inspected and tested before you were allowed to wire it. That was in the good old days when you did things in stages and you didn't put anyone at risk and it was all done properly. And you used a Lucy meter to do continuity testing. So you'd put 21 amps of current through the containment system. And on London Underground, that was very, very, very common until one day a member of staff reported that they got a shock off of a conduit and saw a flash. It was basically a loose connection off the conduit coupler into a bit of trunking, so there's a little bit of arcing. But they reported it and they banned it ever since then. Now I can only imagine if that was on a petrol station. They've just gone bang. Go on. Sorry, George.
Going into testing, you have to do testing on petrol. You cannot take your tester onto the petrol forecourt whatsoever. It's all got to be done in a non-hazardous area. So what you do is there's a method. So for a non-COMPEX engineer, you cannot do a ZS on a petrol forecourt. Simple. What you do, you've got to. I used to do R2 testing, R1 and R2 testing, but it took far too long, and then so they accepted the R2 Wanderley method there. That's why I test petrol stations now when they're closed, which is quite important as well. So you test you got to go out and clamp each petrol dispenser one at a time, but there's a specific method of doing that. And if you're on your COMPEX course and you don't do it in a specific order, you are out. So you've got to unplug your leads from your tester, 100. So literally unplug your leads from the tester, go out onto the forecourt, clamp on your R2 lead, come back in, re-plug your tester back in, do the test, then turn your tester off, unplug the lead, go back and go to the next dispenser. You have literally got to think, right, is there potential of a spark? So you've got to live. So if the tester's still inside the tester and you go out and you take it off, that potential little spark on that pipe work, you zone one of your petrol pump, well, and you got a problem then. So no ZF testing. When you initially commission a petrol station from scratch, there's no petroleum on site whatsoever. The tanks are empty, dispenser. That's the only time you'll do high earth current testing to the petrol forecourt. So your initial installation certificate, you have your high current testing, you'd have your ZS, you have your R1, R2, you have everything. But when you do a periodic inspection, no ZSs whatsoever. It's all calculated from your R2, and so basically you do your I2 testing. You can still do installation resistance testing, depending if it's 3002 pump, or we won't go into all that, or 1370. Because they bring mains and it's all low voltage down from then on. So you're only testing the mains into the pump anyway. The old pumps you have to go in and disconnect. So otherwise you're going to pick up the lamp and everything else in the head.
So just to be clear here, rather than doing, wow to start with, wow. Okay, so when you're doing a periodic or an EICR on a petrol station, you only do an R2 value and then you're effectively calculating it to achieve. Well, that is different. Wow.
Because you cannot take your test onto the petrol forecourt.
Yeah, I mean, I can get that.
Wrong. There is intrinsically safe testing equipment you can take on the forecourt, but we're talking silly money.
Yeah.
But it's not about dummy. But I'm trained, like the other guys as well will say, you're trained to keep your non-intrinsically safe tester in the non-hazardous area. So you take your lead, which are fine, out onto the petrol forecourt, and do it that way. There's plenty. I mean, as we know, you don't have to get a ZS reading. You don't have to get a ZS reading to prove that you've got an earth on a petrol pump. You aren't going to prove that you've got the live or the neutral. You can do the functional test with an R2 test. You know what you've got at that petrol forecourt.
But surely, if you don't mind me asking, during initial verification of the electrical installation, you will do some form of ZS. So this is before the petrol pumps are full of fuel,
before the tanks are full.
So it will go from a normal site into a COMPEX, additional measures required. Surely the guys would do the full suite of testing then, and then those schedules or whatever would be with the installation, so that going out and just revalidating the R2, you're ensuring there isn't an increase in any impedances in the circuit, for want of a better term.
That's perfect. That's 100%. That's what it is. Because there's no way you can test a live forecourt. So what they say is, if it's maintained, I go test petrol forecourts on an annual basis. So you're looking at that installation, and you are looking at it thoroughly every year with a tooth comb. So I'm going in there. I mark things up with an Inkzol, so you know if things have been twisted or turned. You can. I've got warranty void labels I put over. If engineers have been in there in the last 12 months, that's fine, because your people do petrol assist, which are doing weights and measures on the pumps and things like that. So it's not just me who goes into the petrol pumps, and it's other contractors do that as well, the mechanical side. But and they maybe need to get into the electrical box. So there's certain things as a visual. A lot of the ATEX stuff is visual. Maybe later we go into dust and we go into the vapor side and visual, detailed and close inspections. The visual inspection, you can get 70% of that installation. You'll know if it's passed or not by doing a visual. It's like if you're doing the EICR in a house. You take the fuse board off, you know within the first half an hour what age, what condition, and what have you got on your hands with just a visual inspection before you even got a tester out. You've got a rough idea. So with a focus, it's you go in there every single year. It's not like a domestic house. You're testing every 10 years. You're relying on those torqued up connections in that fuse board. You're relying on that earth, because it's like a bit like an MOT. You test a house, you go into that house a year later, that earth might have disconnected. Something might happen, but then no one's going to know for 9 years. So they relax. So with a petrol station, you're going through that petrol station with a tooth comb every 12 months. So those initial readings from the initial install, you're just basically top it up and make sure nothing's happened in between that every single year of the installation.
Okay, so I've got some. I'm going to go controversial now. I've got some questions. I've got some probing questions. So I am a frequenter of said petrol stations, and I've recently witnessed the major conversion of lighting systems at a lot of petrol stations from low and high pressure sodium or metal halide into LED, and some of the LEDs that are installed there are just junk. And I've seen LED installations in petrol stations, and I've actually looked at them and thought, there's no way they are intrinsically safe for use in a petrol station. They just look like a cheap panel that someone sold off the back of a lorry.
Yeah.
And also having worked in COMPEX, but not knowing it was COMPEX at the time, because it's like 20 years ago and it was a petrol station, I've seen blokes just lash it, crash it in, not give a damn.
Yeah.
Is that because maybe when I was working on it, it was a dead site? So it wasn't COMPEX rules, it was just a construction or major refurbishment of a former COMPEX, because they were doing everything, replacing the tanks, digging it all out. It was just refit. And also probably the fact that, if you don't mind me saying, petrol stations are refurbed every pretty much 10 years. So the life of the electrical installations, maybe they can get away with putting in substandard. I mean, Jono, you said that you're getting into it because your clients' expectations of not being met. What's your view on it?
Because of the nature of a landfill site, and especially being here in Swansea, the site is like a mile from the sea. We have contractors come in and they're fitting things outside. It's an extremely harsh environment. You've not only got salt sprays to deal with, you've also got God knows what that could be present in the waste. People will just come along, they'll get a standard IP66, IP65 metal box, stick it on a bit of unistrut, bung it on site, and things will be connected into that. The same with the isolators for the wells. You walk around site and the guys these have just been fitted, and they're just lying on the ground next to a well. And within 2.2 meters of that well is zone 2. So they shouldn't even be there. They're normal isolators. They're not ATEX rated. They should be outside of that zone. But they're just lying on the ground, cables strewn all over the place, no protection on them. And it's like, what are you doing?
Okay, so I'm gonna jump in and I'm gonna ask George a question. He's just mentioned ATEX rated. So for those listening at home who aren't aware, they've just discovered COMPEX, what it is. Okay, so this ATEX rating is obviously something for equipment to be installed in areas which are defined as, hazardous environments, explosive environments. So there's ATEX ratings. Are they similar to IP ratings or IK ratings, or is that a different scale of, because we use the term intrinsic, so stuff that's completely sealed from anything, so to the domestic spark, that's like IP68 and above. But from a more technical perspective, is there a difference in zones and ratings of equipment that they have to? What's different about ATEX equipment?
Right. Do you wanna? Where did we start? Right.
Go on. Sorry.
Can I just quickly go back to the canopy situation you talked about with the LED lights?
Yeah, certainly.
Canopy is out to the hazardous area on a forecourt. The canopy and the inside the shop isn't a hazardous, isn't in the hazardous area. It's out of the zone because petroleum. Well, diesel. We don't have to talk about diesel because no vape on diesel. But with petrol, because it's heavier than air, our rules on a petrol forecourt, anything below 1.4 meters is in the zone. Anything above 1.4 is out of the zone. So any approved contractor can go to a petrol station and install canopy lighting. It's not, and they don't have to be COMPEX because it's out of our zone. For an example of that now, a lot of petrol stations on the motorway have got TVs on their dispensers. If you look and you notice, those TVs now 1.4 meters above the floor, they're out of the zone. Apple ID, you can some petrol stations now, which I've come across, you can pay for your petrol wireless now on a petrol forecourt.
Do you not think that they should be in that? Do you think that just invites more areas of grey where you could get substandard contractors doing substandard works, maybe breaching said safety conditions or rules? I mean, surely if you've got, you've just mentioned, which scares me massively, George, because you've just said the inside of the shop is not within that ATEX complex. But if these fumes are, you know, they travel along the ground and you haven't got a proper compartment, is there not a risk that some of these can work their way in through ducts from control cabling and all the rest of it? Or, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong.
No, it's such a kind of worms ball, right? When a petrol station is designed, the dispensers are designed to be a certain distance away from the shop.
Yeah.
So they've engineered if there's a spill. They've engineered if there's a spill on a petrol forecourt, a small spill, because if you drop a nozzle, if you drop a nozzle on a petrol forecourt, it automatically stops the pump. So if you drop a nozzle on the forecourt, it's supposed to properly stop. So if you ever see someone and the hole in the nozzle has gone out of control, stick it on the floor and it'll stop the petroleum flowing through that pump. They've obviously designed, by the time the person has walked that petroleum to the shop, it is already vaporized. Because as we know, you pour petrol on the floor, it's vaporized. So by the time it gets to the shop, it's vaporized. So they put that shop a certain distance away from the dispensers. So once you've walked to the shop, it's vaporized. So there's obviously no trace of that petroleum on your feet. What a lot of crafty, COMPEX, big contractors are doing, and people are making dispensers now. If you've ever looked at a petrol pump, the ATEX box, we'll go into ATEX boxes in a minute. The ATEX box at the base of the dispenser is about a foot off the floor. What they're doing now, they're running the cable in through the duct, through the petrol pump, 4 foot high, put a standard gland in, put it out of the zone above 1.4 meters. So they're not paying the cost of putting that gland in or the ATEX box, bypassing the ATEX box, going straight up into the head, I call it, where you see the pricing and the lights and they can put a normal gland in there, and to regulations, and to the AFIA Blue Book, that's fine. So there is every trade, people are cutting corners, and you can still get away with that. When it comes to an ATEX box now, it is like an IP rated box, but you have different grades of ATEX boxes. You have a D, which is flame proof. You have E, intrinsic increased safety. But what people don't realize, if you've got an intrinsically an increased safety box, which is EXE, which is, if you look at it, they're easy to see the difference. It's plastic, where an EXD will be metal. It's a lot heavier, more expensive flame-proof box metal. An EXE, which you see on many forecourts now, it's just plastic, stuffing glands, because those boxes are not designed to stop the petrol vapor going into them. Those ATEX boxes can have petrol vapor going into them. It's just because there's increased safety. There's nothing heating up or there's nothing sparking within that box to create a spark. So if that's being maintained on an annual basis, they're saying that if those connections have all got ferrules, they've got one cable per terminal. There's loads of little, like, all the non-used cores are all made off to earth. There's loads of little regulations you follow. So if you stick to those, it doesn't matter if the vapor goes into an XE box. Where EXD is designed for relays on. One of the gentlemen, is in the gas industry. the EXD boxes are designed so contactors can go off, relays can go off inside a hazardous area, it'll still be safe. But you can't use an EXD box for that, or the EXD, because it's flame proof. If an explosion goes off with inside that box, it releases with the flange gaps. Special when you're doing inspection, it's all bolted up. It's a lot more heavy duty. Like basically an EXD is like a submarine. All bolts are made out of metal. Where these lighter boxes, or EXE, when I first went into the industry years ago, I'm like, we're in a hazardous area, supposedly for atmospheres, and they've got plastic glands, and they've got. You can get from Eton now, you can get EXE plastic stuffing glands. Look exactly the same as they probably are the same as a stuffing gland. They've probably got like a little diaphragm IP washer in there that makes it ATEX. But it's just the normal contractor is not aware of. So what we do as a contractor, we don't normally touch the shop or the canopy. What a lot of petrol station owners do, because approved contractors are cheaper than a COMPEX contractor, they get the cheaper contractor in to do all the shop and the canopy and everything, and then they get us, a COMPEX engineer, that just do the forecourt. We're happy with that. We work with a lot of approved contractors, and we work well with them. We teach them a lot of things as we're there. And the good thing is with some approved contractors, they know their limitations, which is what approved contractors need to do. If you know your limitations, you pick up the phone, you ring a COMPEX engineer, he does his bit, they do their bit. We're not stepping on your toes, we're not doing the shop or the canopy, and the whole job is done properly. I think instead of putting your hands in, I'll have a go. I think you need to no fault of their own. They're not aware of that. COMPEX engineers are around.
I think, if you don't mind me saying, chaps, I'm starting to build a picture as to why some COMPEX guys are quite protectionist over it. But I think the industry may have done themselves some disservices by, I don't know, by not maybe ensuring that the full site fell within the correct parts of the scope. So the ATEX, I'm reading this I'm the layman of the world. ATEX is the name commonly given to two European directives for controlling explosive atmospheres. Directive 9992 EC, which is known as ATEX 137, or the ATEX Workplace Directive, and ATEX 95, and it would appear they have hazardous gas, vapor and mist environments, ATEX zones 1 and 2, and hazardous dust, ATEX zones 21 and 22. But we'll cover dust probably in another podcast, I think. I'm John. What's your thoughts on all this? Because it's a minefield, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of extra stuff there, and they say things like you mentioned about the testing. I can guarantee that most people who've not even been near a petrol station would not have the slightest clue that was going to even be an issue, never mind even the thought of it. So like you say, you get people going to the shop and just doing testing there, which of course isn't a thing that you're supposed to be doing there. So yeah, there's a whole pile of stuff here which unless you've actually done the COMPEX stuff, you're not going to know about it, and it would seem perfectly ordinary to do it, but of course in that particular situation it definitely isn't.
No, it's fascinating. Tom, please.
I did an EICR last year at an army base in the sort of where they repair the Challenger tanks and everything like that. And there's a lot of inspection pits and bays like you probably would have at a railway station, and you have specific lights that are down the side. And one of the things I picked up on it, that was half of the installation was ATEX and half of it was normal vapor proofs. And when I picked it up, I was told, "Oh, we haven't got a budget for that. Push it off. Don't worry about it." And I was like, "Well, we do worry about it because this is what was designed and installed originally. Why is that lighting not gone back into place?" And it goes back down to what we were saying about skill set earlier on. They don't want to pay for that skill set to come in to fit and put the correct equipment in. So this is one of the challenging things. A lot of companies are now getting guys to come onto these ATEX and intrinsically safe sites around the country, and even abroad and on offshore. They're getting guys to come, who have got maybe instrumentation background, or they've got electrical installation and mechanical background, and they're getting them to do all the donkey work, and then they're getting an ATEX approved guy come in just to do the final tick in a box. And it's kind of, that's one of the things I've been seeing of late, and I've just kind of, you've got to look at the whole wider picture, is that this is not just your average putting a fluorescent fitting in a container and hoping that paint pot that you put in there on the rail depot is not going to make it go bang. This is stuff that can potentially wipe out and kill quite large areas of ground clearance. And if you've got someone who's just not abiding to the guidances that are set out by ATEX, is there any point any of us being ATEX? No, it's not. But the point here of it is that ATEX has been set out there for specific reasons, because it's a specialised area. It's like anything. If you specialise in that area, stick to the guidance. It falls down to educating the client at the end of the day.
Yeah, can I just add to that as well? The wonderful standard you referenced earlier on, BSEN 60079, has section 4.3 defines competence of personnel. And it says the area classification should be carried out by those who are competent. Now, if that doesn't spell it out in black and white, it doesn't what? And understand the relevance and significance of the characteristics and those who are familiar with processing the equipment. That's a really good definition, because that's basically saying don't come in here with all your 7671 malarkey. That's understand how we work, why we work, what's intrinsically safe, and what our methods are. So that, to me, is a very, very robust definition of competence. But one of the things I've found, if you don't mind me being a bit sad, the red guide. Just found the red guide, which is petrol filling stations. By the way, everyone listening, this is free. It's guidance on managing the risks of fire and explosion. Petroleum Enforcement Liaison Group. It's October 2018, and it's 100 odd pages. Why would it be short? It seems to be written by everyone under the sun who's involved with petrol stations and energy distribution. And it seems to be a decent guide on have you guys ever seen this before? I'm just Googling, trying to find information.
As far as I'm aware, the red book is for kiosk operators and people. If you were employed by major supermarkets who work on the petrol station, you're supposed to read that red book, which is supposed to basically a kiosk operator because you see a lot of people go to the petrol station and they're supposed to look out the window, press the button, have a look if they're not filling up a milk carton, or they're supposed to be using an approved container to fill the fuel upon. They're supposed to look outside, look out the window, and then they authorize the fuel in the petrol station. You can't just lift at the pump and take it unless you pay at the pump. Obviously, it's got to be authorized. This red book is for kiosk operators to look over before you operate a petrol station. Going back on the MOD site, when they use half of it, they use COMPEX, and half of it they use this guide, which is JSP 317.
That's right. That's
what
it.
That
Yeah.
This is basically after your blue book, which is this big boy, is purely just petrol stations. That is just a petrol station, right? So because you're a COMPEX engineer, you can go and do MOD work, and you can go and do petroleum sites, or this one is regulations for the storage and handling of fuel and lubrications on an MOD site. That's another regs book that is exactly the same as a petrol station, but if they've got a POL, a mini petrol station on an MOD site, you've got to use GSP rules. And they've obviously got a guidance for that, which is the practitioner guide 5. I don't know if I say this. 0512 book, which is a practitioner guide. It's a guidance to any COMPEX engineer coming onto site. They follow that guidance specifically for. The Army have made their own regs up for their own establishments, basically.
Yeah, that's right, George. I mean, the problem is that a lot of the military bases, I've got to be careful because I still do work for the MOD freelance, but they have a lot of FM companies that are coming in, which manage the bases, and unfortunately, it's not. They're dictated to by, as you say, the army with what they can and what they will and what they won't allow them to do, because obviously with certain attributes of the Official Secrets Act. So I understand, but with safety and British security and everything, but there does come a thing of common sense, which is not very common when it comes to this kind of game. I mean, especially when you look at you've got petrol stations which have got red diesel, which a lot of the British military vehicles are filled up with, and they're sort of like, when I said about the inspection pits having the wrong light fittings in, and you know, when I went down there, it was kind of like brought up to attention. They just looked at me, that whole, you know, shrugged shoulders, and that was it. And it was like, you know, you're sitting there banging your head and they're not listening. But unfortunately, that's one of the things, the MOD, they have specific guidances and rules that they have to work to, so it ticks their boxes.
Well, just on that, so while you've been talking, I've just downloaded JSP 317. I'm just getting introduced to all this new knowledge. It's 2 parts. It's nearly 500 pages. The MOD don't do stuff short. It's like, what is it? The aviation guys. When you go and work at Heathrow, the CAA, Civil Aviation Authority, have their own electrical rules and regulations, and that's hundreds and hundreds of pages as well. And the first line says you will comply with 7671, then it completely deviates from it and goes off on one. What worries me, and I don't know if anybody else listening who does COMPEX would worry about this, is you just mentioned you're going to get the FM companies turning up. One of the biggest problems that I have at the moment in the electrical industry is procurement, because you get these all parts of a company called procurement, like the MOD will have procurement officers, managers. They will go and they will say, right, we need facilities management done, we need this. Unless someone clearly defines that we must have ATEX zones 1 and 2 competent and qualified and certified personnel, well, you may get someone in procurement turn around and say the business will be ATEX competent. Maybe not the individuals. They may go in cheaper. You may then be given rise to risk. You may be breaching COMPEX or ATEX rules and regulations. I think one of the things I'm hearing is regardless of what the industry or sector is, you'll always find bad. You'll find the good, but you'll always find the breaches, the people who don't know that they don't know. And it's fairly evident, and I'm quite happy to say this on this podcast, there is no way in hell I am competent at any of this. And if somebody said to me, come and do it, I would need to do some very serious research, a lot of training, a lot of assessment, and start at the bottom and work my way up and serve my time in this. So if anyone listens to this, think I can walk into COMPEX, think again, pal, because there's a lot of work you need to do and a lot of experience and respect of the reasoning of around this that you need to attain. And it's not a 5-minute thing. That's fairly evident. But yeah, JW,
okay,
do you think you're going to train in it? I want to know John's thoughts on this now.
Well, it's not something I've ever considered really, but there's a lot of stuff there, isn't there? And I think, like we've said earlier, it's not just even one area like petrol stations. There's all the other stuff which we haven't even got into covering yet, like the dust and things. I've actually got a question for whoever wants to answer this. Now, you said earlier that PME is not allowed in petrol stations or TNCS. What happens in the situation where you've got, say, a TNS supply existing, and then the DNO, as they've done in some areas, now says, oh, it might be TNS, but you've got to consider it is PME because we've taken big chunks of the cabling out of the road and we've altered this and changed that. So now consider everything as PME regardless of what it actually is at the site. I mean, what would actually happen in that type of situation?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, you go. Sorry,
right.
I'm still trying to compute it.
Right, diverted neutral currents. We've got 100 milliamps is a maximum allowed on a petrol forecourt. So if you have got PME, you can have. Right, I've got to be careful because I don't.
Wait a minute, did you say 100 milliamps?
Yeah, maximum.
Ooh.
Well, say maximum. That's it. Right. You can have a petrol station stay on PME if you can monitor the petrol. If you monitor the petrol station annually every single year and you blow a maximum permitted value allowed is 100 milliamps. If it's around 50, 60, 40, 30 on a rolling annual basis, you can keep that petrol station on PME. That's what they say. And you cannot tell people to. And if it's above 100, if it's above 100 milliamps, what happens then? If you get a major supermarket chain that's got 100 petrol stations, they're not going to change their TNS supply or PME supply. So what you do then, you have to monitor. This is a massive bugbear of mine. I've measured a petrol station, diverted neutral currents before now, 6 amps. Diverted neutral current. So the maximum we're allowed is 100 milliamps. So with 6,000, with 6,000 milliamps, 5,000, way above the maximum value permitted. You put it out. They either change the petrol forecourt to TT, or it just stays like that. We've got no power to make them change it. We're only reporting on the installation, and it's the same thing's been tested every year.
So I've got that beat. I've used this bad boy in my hand, and I've measured 24 amps on an earthing system before. And funnily enough, we actually found 8 amps was being imported from the DNO. So we had current flow coming in to the electrical installation because it had a low impedance earth rather than the one that the DNO was providing, or not, because it's fairly evident now the DNO is not maintaining the earthing network because it's too costly and it's failing too quickly.
Yeah, I mean, this sort of thing is the reason I asked, because this comes up with electric vehicle charging. And if it's a TNCS supply, there's a whole load of different rules apply to when it's a TNS. But there are certain areas now where if you actually ask the DNO, even if it's obviously a TNS and it's like an old lead cable or whatever, they will actually tell you, oh, well, it might look like that there, but you've got to consider it's TNCS because 50% of the rest of the network's already been dug up and replaced with something else. So it causes trouble there.
You're bang on right, John, because I'm in my house with my, as you beautifully described it, my really crappy board. The installation there is TNCS, even though it was originally a TNS, but all they've done is they've just linked out at the transformer. It's an old cable, so they haven't done any joints in the street, although if they put a new service head, they would do a link at that joint. But as it stands, a lot of installations being marked up as this never happened 15, 20 years ago. It was very clear to walk into an electrical installation, no, this is TNCS, this is TNS. Now it's getting more and more confusing. You're getting installations where you've got the old boxes on the wall on domestic houses, where you've got a new like Series 7 cutout and you've got an earthing conductor going down the tube of where the supply cable is, and I would ascertain that as TNS. But if they're not labelled up as TNCS, you wouldn't know. So we're now getting quite confused over what the supply characteristics are. And also there is this thing now, if you put a local earth at your electrode, it's called a PNB system, protective neutral bonding, which is another weird variation of it, which the regs isn't very clear on. But fascinating. It's fascinating. It's scary, but it's also really fascinating. So can I... and I know, George, you've got probably lots more you want to say. I want to kind of take this to something which everybody remembers. 2005, Buncefield. Huge fire. I think it's fair to say everybody saw the clouds pretty much from wherever you were in the country. Now, I have had the fortunate pleasure of meeting the original Gold Command, the chap who was first on site, who took Gold Command of the site. And he did a presentation on the hazards around the foam that they used to firefight and how it contaminated the ground. And there'll be legal cases going for years, basically, because the foam was old rubbish and contaminated with carcinogens and all sorts. Was Buncefield? I never really got to hear much about the electrical issues. I believe that was a static issue. Did the ATEX regulations change afterwards? Was there an improvement of it? Was there any rules or regulations that changed around Buncefield or soon after 2005 that we know of?
I think, yeah.
Oh, sorry, George.
I think it was a permit problem. Was it? Was it an ATEX problem? Something. It was a permit problem where the permit was signed up, but the work wasn't done. Was it? Am I right in saying that?
That's what I had understanding. It was to do with the permit.
Was it literally a permit? I thought it was static off of the...
Well, it was something to do with the permit and then not putting in a static bonding conductor.
Ah, right. Okay. So the permit didn't define the correct safe system of work, which led to it. Is that what we're saying?
I'm not 100% sure. I think it was a permit issue that all changed all over them, I think.
Yeah, I don't know if I should say this on a podcast, but I actually met a bloke who used to be the maintenance manager of it. And he actually said to me on a site, he went, "Oh, you used to be the maintenance manager at Buncefield." And I just went, "Don't ever tell anyone that. That's like a badge of shame, dude. Don't tell me that, because I just now want to throw you off this site, because that is nothing to be proud of. That thing blew up. It's a railway station, for God's sake. You're not blowing this up." It was all banter, obviously, but it was scary as well. It was really scary. Right. So I think we've got more to talk about on this, but I want to wind this up because we're kind of heading towards the hour mark. Chaps, do you have any more questions or final? Can we go around some final thoughts on this? Shall we start with Tom?
I reckon there needs to be more education out there for clients, end clients, and main contractors on sites about specifying about ATEX approved companies. Again, who are actually specialists like George's company. Someone who's like that. There needs to be more definitions of, like you go into like a directory, and you stay in that. That's what one of the biggest things I always come across, that there's a lot of people who can sort of jump onto the ATEX bandwagon, but there's not a lot of people who know of how many specialised. I mean, I was looking to get some work experience after I qualified. It typed in ATEX approved contractor around where I live in Hampshire. I think there's like two companies, and there's more over Wales side than there is over down here. And obviously we've got a lot of oil refineries down where I'm here, and not many at all. And even then, they're like a skeleton run company. But I think there needs to be more definition, I think, of contractors and education for end clients as well, regarding about selecting the right contractor.
I don't disagree. Jono, thoughts?
I agree with Tom. It's the same with everything, even down to things like fire and emergency lighting. People need to take into account that there are more standards than just BS 7671, and if they're carrying out work, they need to make sure that the work they're doing doesn't have additional requirements over and above what BS 7671 states.
Agreed. Mr. Ward, what's your final thoughts on this for now?
I'll say it's just quite surprising that you've got this situation where, say, if people are going to go work in a petrol station, they have all of these various things that they've offered, the COMPEX and whatever else, and yet there's ordinary contractors going in and doing work, say, in the shop, who aren't actually aware of any of this stuff. And like we said earlier on, just doing a ZE test could actually cause a big pile of problems. And of course, these people are not going to be necessarily aware of this. So, and like, say, replacing canopy lighting or whatever, although it's outside of the actual zone there, it's still within the same electrical system. So it's quite a surprising situation that you've got this sort of two separate groups, one of which should know everything, and the other people, of course, apparently are fairly unaware of a lot of this stuff. So.
Yeah, scary. George,
I just want to hit on 2 main points, really. One, me as a contractor test a petrol station, produce a certificate. It then goes to the local authority of that specific council of that area. The trouble is, they don't know how to read the certificates properly. The problem I get, I failed a few petrol stations last couple of months. You don't code a petrol station C1, C2, C3, or FI. It's A, B, or C. You have A. It's either satisfactory. B, it's satisfactory for continued use as long as defects are done within a specific date, which I look on my guidance and I give a specific date for the defect which to be done. Or it's C, which is unsatisfactory. So there's 2 things there. If I give a satisfactory for continued use certificate, it goes to a local authority. On the front page of that certificate, it's a tiny, tiny little line that says satisfactory for continued use. They don't see the next defect page. So they photocopy it, goes to the license, or the license officer comes to site, looks at the front page, satisfactory for continued use, goes back in the file. They opened up the one more page. They need to slightly change the certificate. They opened up the page, you've got a list of defects. It needs to be done within 1 month, within 2 months. Some of them could be quite serious stuff, but not serious enough to close. Potential, maybe like a C2. Potentially something can happen in that last 12 in the next 12 months. That's the first thing. So, but the trouble is, it's not that they're not trained. They're administrators now, aren't they? They're not really technical people in local authorities now. They're license officer for council, probably for caravan parks. They do LPG installations and things like that. So pubs and clubs, and then they do petrol stations as well. So they're relying on the electrical contractor to give them a certificate because they're the competent one. But then you do give them a certificate, and they don't know how to look at the front page of that certificate. They need a little bit more training on that. I think they should be a member of the APIA Blue Book, and they get sent updates and bulletins through that. And then after point is training. Can we just quickly talk about training?
Yeah, of course. Go for it.
have to be approved. Well, the trouble is, I can only go off the guidance of the JIB. You don't have to be a JIB electrician to get COMPEX. Let's make that clear. But they look at certain criteria before you have to go on that course. So you have to be experienced. You have to be a certain amount of years as an electrician. You can't be an electrician for 2 years and then go on a COMPEX course. You go have 2391. I don't know if it's called that now.
Yeah, no, it is. It is 2391 again.
So there's minimum requirements to get on 7 and 8. COMPEX 7 and 8, just petrol forecourts. And then the train is so expensive, and the pass rate's like 7 to 10%. So
fantastic.
But to
Sounds
get
complex.
on but then the trouble is, you go on there, you've got that COMPEX 7 and 8 for 5 years. You go for your reset. Oh my God, it's a different ball game. They think because you've been in the industry for 5 years, you go and reset now with as a COMPEX exam. They grill you because they think you've been on. When you first go into the cert, if you first do it for the first time, they test you, make sure you know that you're doing things safely to get you on the ball, to get the ball rolling. After 5 years, then you do your reset. It's 10 times harder.
Your time served, didn't they? They're going to go for you. Yeah. Tell us what you know, Sonny.
So what a lot of people do is let the 5 years expire and then go do the 7 and 8 then from fresh again, not do the reset.
Ooh,
but then there's a lot more money then because the reset's for 3 days, and some centres then do. And we're only talking 7 and 8. We've got COMPEX goes all the way to 14. We're only talking about 2 modules here, which is thousands and thousands of pounds just to do those 2 modules, and that's 7 to 10 days just for those 2 modules. So if any guys out there looking at going into COMPEX, fine. If you've got a lot of experience and you've got your competence at what you're doing and you want to go to that next level, it's fine. But then the trouble is, once you become COMPEX, you've got to get the clients then. And if they're stuck with a contractor who's been doing their petrol stations for years, for them to take on a new person or a new contractor to get in that loop on LinkedIn and to get on that, it's a very hard way to get into the industry. And then your insurance goes up, but then we'll just go on to that again. I think we'll leave it there. Otherwise, I'll be talking for the next 2 hours about it.
No. That's good. You know what? There is more than enough that's come out of this where we probably should sit down and do another one of these. To say the least, for me, my brain has melted. My mind is fully blown. George, thank you very much for coming on. Tom,
No problem.
Jono, thank you very much. I'm sure there's lots and lots of war stories that you can share with us. I have a lot more questions on this, to be honest with you. I think there's a lot more we need to explain, and we haven't even got into the other ATEX zones, which is the dust zones 21 and 22. So yeah, there's quite a lot, but I think we're going to end it here. So, gents, thank you very much. John, JW, as always, legend. And until the next one, take care of yourself and each other. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Right.
So